Welcome to the Habit Healers Podcast, where small habits create big transformations. I'm Dr. Laurie Marbas, and here we explore the science and the stories behind lasting change. Through real life experiences, expert insights, and practical strategies, we uncover the habits that heal physically, mentally, and spiritually. So, if you're ready to break free from frustration and build a life of health and vitality, you are absolutely in the right place. So let's get started. But right before we do, I'd love to say thank you to our sponsors. This episode of the podcast is proudly sponsored by Fit Vegan Coaching, the world's leading whole food, plant-based body recomposition coaching program for those between 50 and 86. It's specifically made to help those looking to lose body fat, build lean muscle to combat sarcopenia, and strengthen their bones to fight osteoporosis. Founded by Maxim Seguin, whose personal journey began after losing his late partner to breast cancer in 2020. Fit Vegan Coaching is on a mission to help 10,000 people get lean, thrive, and reduce risk of chronic illnesses by 2033 and 1 million by 2050 through whole food, plant-based eating, and fitness. This program is the industry leader in whole food, plant-based body recomposition. They've helped over 850 people from 20 different countries transform their lives. I personally went through the program and lost 7% of body fat, gained lean muscle, and even improved my running time, all while feeling energized and healthy. They offer all-inclusive services to ensure you reach your goals, from world-class accountability to customized strength programs, tailored nutrition, and much more. They will even help you speed up your metabolism post-fat loss to ensure the weight doesn't come back. Say goodbye to the yo-yo dieting and embrace a lasting transformation. Ready to take charge of your health and vitality? Head over to fitvegancoaching.com and mention Dr. Laurie for exclusive bonus savings when you sign up. Don't miss this opportunity to join this movement toward a healthier, fitter, and more vibrant you. Hey, welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm Dr. Laurie Marbas, and I'm so excited to have back after a long hiatus. We hadn't talked in a while. It's Dr. Jud Brewer. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Well, I'm excited to have you on because, and honestly, we had a little delay because I had to reschedule, but you didn't have your Substack then, but now you have a Substack. So, can you tell us a little bit about the Substack? And then I'd like to share, talk about one of your articles that you just posted.
Oh, sure. Well, it's the weekly newsletters called Inside the Curious Mind. And I like the Substack format because there's a lot out, that over the years where there are these internet myths that my patients keep coming to me with, and I'm like, no, it's not that, or, something scientifically that needs to get out there or whatever. And it's just really fun to just write a short article and, publish something new or different every week, whether it's a clinical vignette from a patient that I saw or something that my lab, published in a research study that we've done, or just, there are probably 5 or 10 internet myths that just really drive me crazy, and I can help set the record straight.
Only 5 or 10? That's it?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there are more, but
Oh,
5 or 10
Lord.
that I focus on, things like, like dopamine being a happiness molecule. Read my Substack on that.
Yes,
It's not.
exactly, which was fantastic. That was two articles ago, I think, or one article. Yes, but the way you describe it, well, we could have a whole conversation just around the dopamine molecule. But but oh gosh, you'll probably yeah, no. It's no, I'm gonna stay focused, sorry. So this is amazing. It's called The Curious Mind, which of course you always say curiosity is your superpower. So if I ever say that, guys, completely attributed to Dr. Jud Brewer, who taught me that many years ago. I can't remember how long ago. It's been a second now. And all
Yeah.
about mindfulness and really appreciating that. And it's really changed how I think about things in practice and love talking about mind's healing habits now, of course, but fantastic. But the one article you have more recently is What If Anxiety is a Habit, Not a Disorder? I love this title. This is an amazing title. Um, and so your subtitle was This is a two-page insight from a 1985. Oh, two-page insight from 1985 that changed my clinical practice and could change how we understand worry itself. So maybe we should talk a little bit about something about, your own story about medical school and things that happened and kind of led you down the path to where you are now.
Sure, sure. Well, I guess some of it was that I was pretty anxious in medical school and used to get panic attacks in residency. I wrote about that in my book on running anxiety. But the thing that really I highlight in the Substack article is where I was really struggling when I started practicing as a psychiatrist in helping my patients with anxiety. The prescribing standard medications like SSRIs, which are the gold standard. It turns out about 1 in 5 patients benefits. The number needed to treat officially is 5.2, meaning for every 5.2 patients that I prescribe medication to, only one of them shows a significant reduction in symptoms. So I was basically playing the medication lottery, hoping that my next patient would be one of the lucky ones genetically or whatever. And then I was scratching my head, wondering what to do with the other 4 out of 5. And so at the time, my lab had been studying habit change. So we'd done work with smoking cessation and gotten really good results there, like 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment, things like that. I published some really good studies there. And then, my patients who are struggling with eating, they were actually saying, "Hey, could you create a program for anxiety because anxiety is triggering my stress eating or whatever?" And at first, I was like, "Well, I don't know. I prescribe medications for anxiety," but it put a bug in my ear to go back and look
Mhm.
at the literature. And this is where it got super fascinating. This is the big aha for me. So it turns out back in the 1980s, this researcher at Penn State, his name is Thomas Borkovic, he wrote this 2-page paper, basically with a throwaway title like, "Oh, maybe worry is important." 1985, I never learned about it in grad school or residency or med school or anything. But he suggested this very simple thing, which was that anxiety could be driven through negative reinforcement, which is a fancy term for anxiety could be a habit.
Yeah.
And when I read that, my eyes basically popped out of my head because I was thinking, oh, I've never thought about anxiety this way, but it makes complete sense. It makes complete sense. So I'll pause there before going on. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, so well, I know your work. So I have pondered upon anxiety as a habit for many, I would say years now, because after I talked to you and learned about this, and now I share this with patients. Like I had to learn how to explain it. So
Mhm.
it makes perfect sense to me. So I call this, there's like a knowledge curse, right? When we understand something so well that we forget what it's like not to understand it. So this is what I'm serious. This is literally what I found with the articles that work so well on Substack is when I forget that I'm a expert. And it's like, how do I need to understand this if I wasn't? And so that was a really important piece. But yes, so you're saying, what's another example of negative reinforcement so that maybe we can understand it? Because we don't, it's kind of hard to put it as worry as a thing that we do. It's just like a
Mhm.
state. I think people feel like it's a state versus it's an actual activity. And so is there a way to explain that?
Well, yes, and it's kind of both. So
Yeah.
I can use another example, but let's dive right in and see if this makes sense. And then we could also use another example to illustrate it if helpful. Anxiety is interesting because the in the definition of anxiety is a feeling of worry or nervousness about, something in the future, basically. And if you look at the word worry and you zoom in there, worry is both an adjective, I feel worry, but also a verb. I worry. And so the feeling of worry can trigger the mental behavior of worrying. And if
Mm,
we zoom out a little bit, forming any habit only needs 3 elements: a trigger, a behavior, and a result. So the trigger can be the feeling of anxiety. So, for example, my patients often describe waking up in the morning just feeling anxious, right? So somebody can have a feeling, or they can have a thought like, "Oh no, am I going to be anxious all day?" That can trigger the mental behavior. There's element number 2, the mental behavior of worrying, where they just kind of set off this, "Oh no, oh no, oh no,"
mhm,
which then results in the feeling or the illusion of control. And this is
mm,
important because anxiety is basically fear of the future Now, fear in the present moment is helpful because if we're afraid, we can get out of danger's way. Yet, fear of the future doesn't work because you can't get out of danger in for something that hasn't happened yet,
Right.
right? So we kind of get stuck in this this perpetual cycle of this oh no, where we feel this urge to do something, but we can't do something for something that hasn't happened yet.
Hmm.
So that's where the illusion of control comes in. People feel that worrying is doing something because it feels better than doing nothing, because anxiety says do something, right? That
Hmm.
feeling of nervousness says do something. So we do something, we worry, which then ironically feeds back and makes us more anxious and then just spins the cycle. So the feeling of anxiety drives the mental behavior of worrying, which results in this illusion of control or at least doing something, which feeds back and says next time you feel anxious, you should worry. So
Hmm.
that's where the whole cycle gets set up. And I see
Hmm.
this all the time in my clinic, all the time.
This is just a basic human element. Honestly, I think as a mother, that's where I first developed the worry habit. Oh God. And so, so this makes perfect sense. So very quickly, because now we know this is a habit, I do have a question. So sometimes when people describe habit loop, of course, it's the trigger, the behavior, the reward, result, whatever you want to call those things. But sometimes people say there's a craving element here. And
Mhm.
so is there also the almost like you that anticipation of needing control? Like where does that craving piece fit in that part of
It's
it?
so sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not there. So I think that got popularized, at least the best from what I can tell. Charles Duhigg wrote a great book called The Power of Habit or something
Hmm.
back in
Yep.
2012 or something.
Yep.
And he talked about these four elements. He said there was a craving there. If you look at positive and negative reinforcement, they don't require a craving.
That's what I was
And
thinking. Yeah.
yeah, in the addiction literature and research, there's been a debate about craving for a long time,
Mm.
in terms of how critical it is for an addiction, and some say that it can be unconscious, some say it has to be, conscious. There's all this debate. Whenever there's a lot of debate, that probably means people are missing something or they're complexifying something, if that's
Mm.
if that's a word.
Yes, yes, yes.
What we do know, and this is shown in humans, this is shown in non-human primates, rodents, and things like that, is the three elements of positive and negative reinforcement. So whether a craving is stuck in there or not, I wouldn't say it's necessary,
Okay.
and I wouldn't even say it's sufficient, but it may be stuck in there somewhere.
Mm.
Now, some could say, so for example, with anxiety, why would craving be in there? I would say one of the shared elements between addiction and anxiety is that urge to do
Mm.
something, right? So you could say when somebody's in withdrawal, it's unpleasant. And so they're going to be through negative reinforcement, their brain's going to say do something to make that unpleasantness go away. If it's nicotine, if it's opioids, if it's whatever. And so they're going to do the thing, they smoke a cigarette, take a pill, heroin, whatever. And you could say, well, that itchy urge is a craving, right?
Mm.
That urge, that motivation to do something.
Mm.
So you could say, well, there's a motivation to do something with anxiety. Does that equal a
Hmm.
craving? I don't know. And honestly, I don't think it matters. You could call it a craving. You don't have to call it a craving. You could just say there's an urge. People have ants in their pants to do something, whether it's anxiety or addiction.
Yes. I would almost say it's interesting, right? So a good example is when my daughter was a senior in college, she went on a trip to Spain. It was her first international trip without us. And of course, I'm going to freak out a little bit as a mother traveling. She's fine. So I was like, I set up, but I had this. this almost undeniable like sense of like I got to do something. So I tried to control as much of it as I could. It's really fascinating, this worry mother habit. And so I like set up the cell phone where I could track her wherever she was, and that I was like, if you don't respond, I'm gonna call, and I'm like, it was a bit ridiculous now looking back at it, thinking,
You didn't suture an air tag into her
no,
skin somewhere?
they would have had that available. But it was really it's ridiculous as it is. It sounds. I'm sure there's other people out there who can understand, but it is almost like the moment that something feels like you're going to be out of control, it's that urgency. It's like you have to do something. It's even if it's the worry or it's the like, but anyway, I wanted to highlight a real physical sense of like out
Yeah.
of being out of control, needing to do something as much as possible. But then this is where your brilliant lab and all your techniques with the mindfulness and stuff come in, because I've learned so many more things and my children are much happier now because I've relaxed somewhat. And so let's get back to this paper. So I think we've explained the sense of the anxiety as a habit, that negative reinforcement. Can we talk a little bit more about where this led you and to your aha moment and how you've evolved?
Yeah, absolutely. So interestingly, historically, I was wondering why nobody had talked about this paper because it seemed kind of important to me.
Right.
And it turns out that it was published 2 years before Prozac came out. And I think Prozac came out in 87. And so that was hailed as this magic bullet. It's going to help depression and then anxiety. Unfortunately, it's this shiny object that everybody was looking at and thinking that it was going to solve all the world's ills. To the point where somebody even wrote a book called Prozac Nation because so many people were on SSRIs. Unfortunately, the promise was more than the delivery. There was a study in the UK not too long ago showing that SSRIs are basically no better than placebo at this point.
Wow.
And so, we could talk about, there's often a hype around a new medication which can increase its efficacy due to placebo effects and things like that. Doesn't mean that that effect isn't real. Like that's a real effect. People really do feel better. But over time, when the medications lose the shininess, the placebo effect also goes away. And so
Mm.
we need mechanisms that we can target that are more reliable and more consistent than a placebo effect because that can be affected by a number of factors environmentally and personally.
Exactly.
So if you look at negative reinforcement, it's a very strong mechanism. Eric Kandel got the Nobel Prize showing that it's evolutionarily conserved all the way back to the sea slug. So this is a real thing that's not going away. It's how we learn.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
I started playing around in my clinic, well, responsibly introducing this concept to my patients just to see if they would understand it and if we could help them,
Right.
starting by, hey, let's explore worry and see if it's negatively reinforced. And it turns out that we could apply the same methodology that we'd been studying with smoking and eating to anxiety. And so we
Mm.
created this app to test it so we could do randomized controlled trials. We ended up doing a number of studies. I won't go into all of them. But the biggest one that we did was with people with generalized anxiety disorder. So, taking the hardest hit of individuals and what we found was we got a 67% reduction in these clinically validated anxiety scales in people who got our add-on app versus the usual care. And interestingly, the usual care, clinical, they could have whatever they usually get, medication, psychotherapy, whatever. They were showing a 14% reduction in anxiety. So, in line with that number needed to treat of 5.2 is actually pretty similar to that, which is interesting.
Right.
So
Exactly.
we're replicating this number needed to treat, but we're also getting a number needed to treat with our training people how to use their brains, basically. Number needed to treat dropped from 5.2 to 1.6,
Wow.
meaning a lot more people benefited from it. And the way I think of it is for with medication, some people benefit, but if you train yourself to learn how your mind works and work with your mind, anybody can benefit from that.
Mm.
So that's where we started, rolling out this three-step methodology to help people. Step one, know that anxiety is a habit and that worry is that behavior that drives it. That's pretty straightforward. Step two, having people really explore and ask themselves the simple question, what do I get when I worry? So they can see that worrying actually just feeds back and drives more anxiety, and it doesn't solve problems. It doesn't keep their kids safe. I don't know.
Nope.
Your, your daughter was safe, but that was probably correlative, not causative from your worrying. I'm just guessing.
What? What do you mean? It wasn't helpful?
Right.
Exactly. Okay. So we
And then,
understand
of
that
course,
piece.
yeah, and the third step is just learning to use superpower of curiosity as the new behavior. So when somebody goes, "Oh no," they can catch that worry and then go, "Oh," and they can turn that curiosity toward the feeling of anxiety, notice the restlessness, notice that itchy urge to do something, and then see that it comes and goes. And the curiosity itself can help them just be with that experience and notice that they don't have to do anything except be with it. So it's,
Mm-hmm.
the new doing is being. And that's a superpower.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's such a simple sentence, but it's so profound. Okay, so when you say that when we talk about being, can you go into that a little bit more? Because I will say, whether it's someone dealing with cravings for ultra processed foods, the worry, the smoking, whatever, that piece of it, that, feeling comfortable in that itchy feeling. Let me get rid of, there we go. The itchiness that I maybe is the craving or maybe is that eruption. How do they get out? Because some people feel so overwhelmed just by that little experience that they have to relieve it immediately. So I know we've talked about it being too hot sometimes, but can you just kind of refresh our minds on what to do there? What does that mean?
Sure. And I would say, and I've actually just written a Substack newsletter post about what's called distress tolerance.
That's
Uh,
great.
because I think societally we have unlearned the ability to be with distress, any type, and whether it's sitting at a stoplight for 30 seconds, people have to pull out their phones and distract themselves, as compared to just sitting there for 30 seconds at a red light. So, and unfortunately, I see parents teaching that through modeling to their kids.
Yep.
So we see this not only in adults, but we're seeing it in younger generations because kids are learning to distract themselves. So I think some of this comes from just the inability to be with anything that's uncomfortable for a moment, right? We're in an era of instant gratification. We're in an era of, where information or attention is the economy.
Hmm.
And when you combine those, you can say, oh, because our brains naturally like information because it tends to help us survive. Our ancestors, if there was a rustling in the bushes, they couldn't ignore that information. They had to go figure out if that was danger or not. And so our brains are wired for information, to get information. And then you've got these weapons of mass distraction, as Cornel West puts it.
Hmm.
We've got these information machines that can be pumping out information all the time.
Hmm.
So we can go on our social media feeds, we can go on our news channels, we can go on all the different things that can distract us anytime we've got that urge of that says, hey, you're bored and boredom doesn't feel good, or you're
Hmm.
anxious and anxiety
Hmm.
doesn't feel good.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of it is driven through the societal habit of mass distraction.
Hmm.
And because of that, people are just unfamiliar with the ability to like be with just something that doesn't feel pleasant. And then I don't know what the old days were like because, I wasn't alive in the 1800s, but I imagine, when people didn't have air conditioning and they didn't have all the things that really soothed all of the unpleasantnesses, they were just used to being hot and sweaty when it was hot and hot in the summer. And they were used to being cold when they didn't have great insulation in their houses and had to stoke the fire, to warm it up and had to go out to the outhouse to go to the bathroom. Like there were lots of unpleasant things that just reminded people like, oh, you're not going to die if it's unpleasant. It's just unpleasant.
Hmm.
Whereas now it feels like, oh no, I'm going to die if I have to. be with myself for a second. There was a study, and I think I highlighted this in the distress tolerance article. There's a study from 2014 where researchers at the University of Virginia had people sit in a room for 15 minutes without their phones, and it drove people nuts. Basically, I won't go into all the details, but it basically drove people nuts because they were just not used just I mean, it's not even that they were in an uncomfortable situation. They were just uncomfortable not having these things that usually distracted them from their own from themselves,
Right, right. Wow.
and from life, even if nothing is happening. It's crazy.
We've turned it's a sad state of the human being a human. It really is. It's discovered. I wrote an article also about kind of seeking discomfort and utilizing it as a tool to be accepting of the reality of the world and that you don't need
Yeah.
to be. Yes, it's kind of a similar path, but I was doing it more like go actually seek discomfort. Don't, just sit with it. Like go find it. So then you can actually build this talent that we used to have that just came with the being a human, that we have discarded. But yeah, so okay, I can't wait for this article. It's gonna be amazing. So the distress intolerance, it's like glucose intolerance, insulin resistance. We have distress intolerance.
Right.
It's a new diagnosis. Oh my gosh. So when we have someone who's dealing with that distress intolerance, I love these two words together. What is your recommendation? Is it like when they feel like the anxiety, almost because I feel like sitting with it sometimes, some of my patients, like I had one patient who type 2 diabetic, morbidly obese. She would do great for a little while, and then something would happen, some stress, and she'd fall back into her normal habits. And of course, we've talked all about habits, talked about mindfulness, we talked about all the tools, right? And she'd get back in, but she's like, there's food noise in her head, right? It was just constantly, she goes, Dr. Marbas, I removed the app from her phone, the DoorDash app, but it was like I didn't have any of that food in my house, but I knew if I got back on the DoorDash, I feel like DoorDash could be literally some type of craving or some type of addiction. I don't know. But it was her portal to the ultra processed food that she was just really desiring. And she goes, it kept talking to me. It is like I couldn't get it out of my head until I literally downloaded the DoorDash and ordered. And she goes, I only ordered like it was a candy bar or something. It was just like someone went to a 7-Eleven, got this for her. Oh my gosh, that cat is precious. But the absolutely she just couldn't. She goes, I sat with it for an hour and it just wouldn't go away. Like,
Yeah.
how do we help those people?
Yeah, the way we work with that is it goes back to the second step. And so curiosity is a superpower, and we have to know how to fly,
Mm,
right? So part of it is, there's real, I wouldn't call it magic. I'm just going to say there's real muscle in that second step of asking ourselves, what am I getting from this? And how that works, neurobiologically, there's this process called reinforce, the whole reinforcement learning process is built on determining how rewarding something is. And then once we've done it a while, our brain doesn't even pay attention to how rewarding it is. It just does it as an automatic behavior, hence a habit. And so the only way to, and then you can think of that as we've become enchanted. It's a spell because we are not conscious, it's like Pepe Le Pew floating across, following the scent of the cat. We're just automatically doing things. We're enchanted. And
mm,
the only way to break that spell is not through willpower, because that is more myth than muscle. I wrote a Substack on that as well. Um, but it's really through leveraging reinforcement learning. And the way that works is really paying attention to see how rewarding something is right now. So, for example, when worry becomes a habit, we just do it automatically. When we start to ask ourselves, what am I getting from this? We start to see how rewarding it actually is. And what my patients report is, oh, it's actually not that rewarding. It just makes me feel anxious. And they have to see through the fallacy of thinking that worrying is helping them do something, right?
mm,
Because there's an enchanting element there that is also correlation and not causation. where they're like, oh, but worrying helps me do stuff. No, it doesn't. It actually gets in the way of doing things. And once they can see that it doesn't help them solve problems or keep their family members safe, and in fact just drives more anxiety, that's where they become disenchanted. And then it gets easier to bring in that curiosity. And the same is true, for example, with you talk about this patient with eating with the candy bar. So what I would suggest there is like go ahead and eat the candy bar.
Mm-hmm.
And then ask yourself, what did I get from this? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I wrote about one of my patients, I think in the Unwinding Anxiety book, but also in the Hunger Habit, he described as being addicted to fast food. And he had to really map out the process. And when he was anxious, he would eat fast food. That was his go-to behavior. And he saw that eating fast food was actually making him more anxious because he had all this health anxiety because he had, fatty liver. He basically pateed his liver. He had obstructive sleep apnea. He had hypertension. All these things related to. He was 400 pounds,
Mm-hmm.
to his weight. And so his second visit to me in my clinic, he reported, he's like, oh, I lost 14 pounds. And we hadn't even talked about weight loss yet.
Wow.
But the thing was that he realized that fast food was actually making him more anxious. And so he became disenchanted and he stopped eating it because he was like, this is not doing it for me anymore. He went on to lose over 100 pounds. All the medical stuff went away. And he's actually slowly continuing to lose weight. And he said it's the easiest weight loss he's ever had. So the key is not to try to force ourselves not to eat the candy bar. It's to really dive in and ask ourselves, what do I get from eating the candy bar? Right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're lonely, if we're bored, like is it emotional eating? And how if it is, how can we meet those emotional needs rather than feed those emotional wants?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Perfect. And honestly, it's interesting. If you don't treat it like this, if you don't become disenchanted as you described it before with that, with using the mindfulness and understanding what's going on and driving the behavior, some of my patients will react out of fear because they were diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, they're diagnosed with something. And that fear will only last so long. And then it's almost like they do really well for like 6 months and then they fall off a cliff and it's even worse
Yeah.
than it was before because they never dealt
Yeah.
with this piece. And that's the piece that I worry about also with this GLP-1s. And, it turns down the food noise and it does actually help people lose weight, but
Yeah.
it's not the first go-to I do. But now I look at this with patients. I work with them and I'll see some real significant people do really well and then they may lose 30 pounds, but then they struggle with the stress and stuff, but they've learned the habits. They've learned to sit with themselves. They've learned these tool sets. Now we could prescribe GLP-1s because now we have the tool set so that we can really see some acceleration and benefit and then we can come off the GLP-1s and safely do it and not worry. So that is
Yeah.
the so important piece. And
Yeah.
so I think this is, I mean, I've always literally, I don't know how many people I've sent to your book, all of your books, but especially this unwinding anxiety, and the hunger habits. But I really like the unwinding anxiety, how it's set up because so many of that drives food behavior.
Yeah, it
And
does.
so, yeah.
What you said reminds me of this great quote from it was an ancient Persian poet and mystic. His name was Hafiz or Hafez. And he said, fear is the cheapest room in the house. I want to see you in better quarters, right?
Wow.
Because that really encapsulates what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas, like fear can get us to do things quickly because it's fear, right? It's going
Right.
to get us to react automatically. We've got to be able to, that's the cheap room in the house. We've got to be able to rely on the wiser, stronger part of our brains, those better quarters. And that's where disenchantment comes in, and curiosity comes in as a superpower.
Perfect. Well, I know we're running short on our time, and you guys check out the link. I'll put the link to his article below. Definitely go subscribe to Dr. Jud Brewer's The Curious Inside the Curious Mind Substack. I will have a link for that. I will be recommending this regularly. And so thank you, Jud, for another delightful conversation as always. I feel like we could talk for hours as always. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure.